What was it like being in jail over the last couple of weeks? What was that experience like? Was that the first time you had been in jail?
I've been to jail a number of times. This is the longest I've ever done. It was my first time in a federal prison, and it was actually kind of a spiritual retreat. I think one of the reasons they were inclined to release me was that I was making the guards depressed by being so cheery and demonstrating how real freedom is a state of mind. And I noticed that by and large the prisoners are thin and happy and healthy, and it's the guards who are miserable and overweight, sucking down soda pops, and it's really interesting to see that contrast. But while I was in prison, we learned from one of the court hearings that I was singled out, and I mean, if it wasn't already obvious from the circumstances of the event, but that there were other federal agencies involved other than the United States Park Department that was there in actually conducting the arrest, and that the Federal Protective Service and a number of other agencies had contacted the officers that were involved in my arrest, and it's largely because I am or was planning a loaded open carry march for Independence Day. But since the government has decided to step up their tactics and make such an event impossible, if they're willing to imprison us for just being organizers, I released a statement while I was in jail, and I'd like to share it if it's all right with you.
Sure, by all means. I mean, we're going to hold you over for another segment and talk about the loaded open carry rally that you had been planning. But go ahead, tell us a
Yeah,
little bit
I'm
about
sorry,
your
I
statement
really
that
don't
you
have
issued.
time for another segment today. I've got another interview scheduled. But this is what we came up with in prison. And as the government has escalated their tactics, we need to escalate our tactics as well. So making this an open source thing at all 50 state capitals rather than in D.C. and not depending on me is the most important aspect of it. So the statement goes, when a government has repeatedly and deliberately failed to follow its own laws, violated the fundamental human rights of its citizens, threatened the sanctity of a free press, created institutions intended to eliminate privacy of communication, waged war at the behest of special interests that threatens the public safety, killed hundreds of children with drone strikes, imprisoned and destroyed the lives of countless individuals for victimless crimes, stifled economic opportunity to maintain the dominance of the financial elite, stolen from the people through an absurd system of taxation and inflation, sold future generations into debt slavery, and abused its power to suppress political opposition, it is unfit to exist. And it becomes the duty of the people to alter or abolish that government by whatever means necessary to secure liberty and ensure peace. A new American revolution.
Adam, I want to stop you there because I want to get in a question about, because you got to go. I do want to ask you, look, and I appreciate the statement, and I'll encourage everybody to do freeadam.net to see the statement in its entirety. But the thinking in terms of an open carry rally in Washington, what was behind that thinking, given that it is illegal in Washington to carry loaded weapons?
Sure. Well, the rest of the statement is at adamversustheman.com, and the most important thing is that people get in contact with Jeffrey Phillips, who's our national coordinator. It's Jeffrey, Jeffrey, at adamversustheman.com. But the purpose of the armed march was to show that it's not illegal, and if people are going to arrest us for asserting our firearms rights, then they are the criminals, and I think we already exposed.
Right, but the citizens of D.C. have already determined that open carry is illegal in D.C. So why not say respect the citizens of D.C. and go ahead and have an open carry march across the river in Virginia, but respect the views of Washington, D.C.?
Why not respect the Supreme Court and the Constitution of the United States? Why not respect
both of which have given the citizens of D.C. the right to put certain restrictions on carrying open firearms. Firearms are still legal. There's been no infringement on the Second Right in Washington, D.C., but the citizens of D.C. have determined that carrying loaded firearms in D.C. is illegal.
Well, it's keep and bear specifically, and the Supreme Court was not that specific in its ruling in Heller versus D.C. It simply struck down the laws and instructed the district city council to come up with a way for people to be able to carry firearms legally, and they have not done that yet.
But Adam, I mean, the police, the Secret Service, all law enforcement agencies, people who protect members of Congress, the White House, even ordinary citizens have said that this is a provocation, that to encourage people to carry loaded weapons on the streets of Washington is a really combustible and dangerous situation.
Well, I think anytime you stand up for your rights, there are risks that it entails. But I think we should be appealing not to authority as per logical fallacy, but we should be appealing to our conscience and to truth and to logic and reason, and they would dictate that we need to assert our rights, or they're simply going to be continue to be taken away by government. So I think that was an important stand, and a lot of people recognize that.
Right, and you're still free to assert your rights. You can still picket, you can still protest, you can still demonstrate for guns. You just carry loaded firearms. And if we're talking about certain appeals, why don't we appeal to common sense and say if the idea is to promote the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms, that maybe the way to do that is not to have a needless provocation with people in perhaps one of the most secure and sometimes threatened cities in the country.
Well, a needless provocation, that's a good intellectual cop-out, but I think Henry David Thoreau had it right when he wrote that civil disobedience is a duty, and that when there are unjust laws, as we believe that the laws restricting those rights are, that they should be broken. But more importantly, I think it's a terrible attitude you represent to cower before government and say, well, if government says you can protest this way, then you're only going to protest this way. I mean, if everybody really took that to its logical conclusion, this country would be even in worse shape than it is today with people bending over for government. But the more we stand up, the better off we are, and the more we can put government in its place. And I think Thomas Jefferson was right when he said, when the government, or when people fear the government, there is tyranny. When the government fears the people, there is liberty. So we do aim to change that equation, and I think given the state of this country, it's long past time to worry about such niceties and being polite as opposed to, being provocative is simply a good start as opposed to waiting until it's too late. But, we really need to come to accept now that this is a nation as an empire in decline. And we shouldn't be asking, do we want America to survive, but rather how do we want America to end? And I want to see it end with a peaceful, orderly dissolution of the federal government rather than a violent, dangerous collapse. And I think anything we need to do to stand up for that is justified at this point. Because
right, but if you want something peaceful, it's hard for people to see how carrying loaded weapons in the face of police and Secret Service saying don't do that, and oh, by the way, it's against DC law. If you want something peaceful, it's hard to see how flaunting that will help. But what is your message, Adam, to people who hear you and hear about this call for a rally, which you've now canceled, and say, this guy's nuts, he's crazy, maybe he suffers from PTSD?
Well, we've postponed that, and it's actually now a rally at all 50 state capitals, and we have people signing up all over the country to coordinate for their local events. And it's very exciting to see that this call to end the Fed, to have an orderly dissolution of the federal government is really catching on. But most people who are in a position where they're concerned about where this country is going, they're not going to say, oh, the guy that's taking a stand, he's got these problems, or we don't like this about him or that about him, or we don't agree with his religion, or whatever the case may be. They're just glad that someone's standing up and doing something about it rather than just standing on the sidelines and trash talking.
And Adam, just to be clear, so you've canceled the rally, but you did say on your website that should one whole year from this July 4th pass, while the crimes of this government are allowed to continue, we may have passed the point at which nonviolent revolution becomes impossible. So you're suggesting that a year from now, if things haven't changed, that people should engage in a violent revolution?
Well, I think we're actually already in a violent revolution as the government has shown that it doesn't care about the law. We've been taken over by, criminals in that sense, and there is violence being carried out against the people of the United States every day. The aggressor in this case is clear. You're 8 times more likely to be killed by a cop than by a terrorist, and the government has made it clear that they are the aggressor here. They are the initiator of violence. And if the people need to defend themselves, I wholeheartely support that, but I'm afraid we've already come past the point where a nonviolent revolution would be possible, because as we can see, as you pointed out, for my arrest in Philadelphia last week, for standing next to someone smoking marijuana, I was grabbed. The feds tried to tackle me, detain me, and lock me in a cage for a week. So I think we've already passed that point. But yeah, basically, I'm setting a guideline that if a year passes from the people starting to have this conversation about whether or not we'd be better off without the federal government, we need to start discussing stepping up the tactics, because the government has made it clear that they're willing to use violence to suppress political opposition.
Adam Kokesh, he is the host of Adam versus the Man, the YouTube show. It's Adam, look, you and I disagree on a lot, but we also agree on some things, and I appreciate your willingness to come on and talk about the plans that you had for the march, the plans that you have for this July 4th in capitals across the country, and also your plans for a year from now. And we look forward to staying in touch and talking with you again.
Yep, my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Adam Kokesh. Take Action News continues on the other side of this break.